Very top of 18a. We're at Toshma, end of the second line. Okay. And the question the Gemara was asking was if somebody who accepts to become a Nazir when he's in a basic forest cemetery, if he has to bring a korban, he has to shave his head at the conclusion of his tahara. So typically a Nazir that becomes Tamei needs to start over. And that includes to shave all his hair, and when he becomes tahar, he does that when he becomes tahar, and then he restarts his Naziris. The question is that somebody that becomes Tamei because he brings a korban? What about somebody who became a Nazir when he was Tamei? Is that in the same category or not? He doesn't bring a korban, but does he shave his head? Pashma, let's see the brayso. V'timei breish nizrei. He makes his Naziris Tamei. What's that talking about? But Tahar Shnit Makasim Daber. We're talking about a Tahar, somebody who was a kosher Nazir, and then he became Tamei. Shaitan Havarasar, that he needs to cut his hair. Vavos Tziparan Velifter as a Nazir. Vavos Tziparan, he also has to bring the birds as a korban. The lifter as a Nazir Bekever, and to exempt somebody who became a Nazir when he was somebody became a Nazir when he was inside a cemetery. That it does not require cutting his hair or bringing a korban. This would seem to be logical. If somebody would start off tahar has to cut his hair, then somebody who's tamei to begin with, it would seem that that's also a necessary prerequisite to becoming tahar, bringing korbanos and cutting your hair. It's a Talmud Leimer of a Timei Reish Nizrei. He makes tamei the beginning of his Naziris, but Misha Hayat Tahar v'nitma. Specifically, somebody who was tahar, he was pure, and then became tamei. Hakasim Dabar Sheitan Havar Asar, that he requires that only somebody who started off tahar has to cut his hair. Vavas Siparan and bring a korban. The lifter as a Nazir Bekever, and to exempt a Nazir that became Tamei, that was Tamei when he accepted Naziris, he is exempt from both korban and from cutting his hair. Shema Mina, and this is a clear proof, and that concludes the discussion. So Nazir that started off becoming Tamei does not need to bring does not need to cut his hair or bring a korban. Okay. Now the Gemara brings an interesting question. Mantana Hadatana Rabbanon. Who is the opinion that makes the following statement? The Tana Rabbanon we learned. Ein ben Tamish Nazar leNazar Tahar. The difference between a Tamei that became a Nazar and a Nazar that became Tamei is El Tamish Nazar Shvi Shalai Olam in a Minyan, Nazar Tahar Shnitma Ein Shvi Shalai Olam in a Minyan. A regular a Nazir that becomes Tamei the 8th day is not included in the count. I'm sorry, 1 second. A Tamei that becomes a Nazir starts his count after it becomes pure, which is on the 7th day. Whereas a Nazir that becomes Tamei starts once he's able to bring his korbanos, which is on the 8th day. So who authors this opinion? So now we'll learn a bunch of different opinions when exactly a Nazir ends his when a Nazir that is Tamei is allowed to restart counting. So the first two opinions are as follows. 1 second. Okay. Who's Amar of Chizah? Rav Chizah says Rabbi. It's the opinion of Rabbi. To Amar Rabbi, Ein Naziris Tahara Chala Elo Ad Shmini. The guy can only restart his Naziris, or it's not necessarily a guy, the Nazir can only start his Naziris on the 8th day. The Item Rabbi Yehudah, if he says it's Rabbi Yehudah, he Amar Naziris Tahara Mishvi Yehudah Chayla. And he says that a Nazir restarts from when he becomes pure, which is on the 7th day. Okay. So so the first two opinions that we're seeing here is a debate between Rebbe and Rabbi Yehudah. Rebbe says that the Nazirus restarts on the 8th day, the day after you become tahar. It's the day that you're able to bring the karbanos. And Rabbi Yehudah says that the Nazirus starts on the 7th day, the day that you become tahar. You bring the karbanos the next day. Okay, so the Gemara says, "My Rebbe, my Rabbi Yehudah." What's the original debate between Rebbe and Rabbi Yehudah? In Tanya, we learned as follows: the Kiddush es roishe b'yemahu. He sanctifies his head, meaning he cuts his hair. B'yem havos karbanaisav. I'm sorry. The Kiddush roishe also means that he begins the process of becoming a new Nazir. B'yemahu, that day. Which day? B'yom havos karbanos, the day that he brings his karbanos. So it's interesting. Let's just take a look. If you have the fancy gemaras on the side of the page to bring the full verse, just read it. For osa hakohen, so I'm just translating the original verse. For osa hakohen, the kohen will perform echad lechatas ve'echad la'olah. One of the sacrifices is lechatas, one of them as an olah. V'chiper olav me'asher chota ala nefesh, and he will atone the fact that the Nazir became tamei. The Kiddush es roishe b'yemahu, and he begins his Nazirus on that day. Okay, well, what do you think that means? It means he brings the karbanos and he starts the Nazirus on that day. Which day? Presumably the day that you bring the karbanos, right? The verse says the kohen is going to bring the karbanos and he'll restart his Nazirus b'yemahu on that day. Which day? Presumably on the 8th day. That's the most logical explanation. The day that you bring the karbanos, the 8th day. Divrei Rebbe. Rabbi Yehudah, I'm Rabbi Yom Tegalachtai. The day that you cut your hair, which is on the 7th day, the day that it becomes tahar. This that we learned, Nazir Shnitma. Okay, so this is the debate, and the Gemara will address how Rabbi Yossi understands what's Rabbi Yossi's source in a moment.
So does it become tahar just from shaving? Does he have to bring the carbon?
He does, yeah. So he's actually tahar when he brings the carbon the next day. I'm sorry. He's tahar in both cases. He is a Nazir when he brings this carbon, as opposed to the Rabbanon. Well, it's complicated. We'll get to the Gemara in a moment. So right now we have two opinions. Okay, first opinion is day number 7. Second opinion is day number 8. According to everything we've seen so far, it is not dependent on bringing karbanos. It's dependent on being able to bring karbanos. It's the ability to bring karbanos. So as soon as the 8th day, the morning of the 8th day, the sun rises, then the guy starts his Nazirus.
This is
the guy who was a Nazir who became Tomei. We're talking about someone who's eligible to bring karbanos. Now, and the Gemara is saying that a Nazir who becomes Tomei starts on the 8th day. And this is the opinion of Rebbe, obviously, right? Because according to Rabbi Yehudah, he would start on the 7th day. Okay, we'll soon see that it gets there's some more debate. Some opinions hold you have to bring some or all of the sacrifices, and we'll get to that in a moment, a few moments. Okay, so again, we have machlokes Rabbi and Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi says the 7th day. Rabbi says the 8th day. Rabbi Yehudah says the 7th day. Now the Gemara has another interesting brisa, and the Gemara wants to know who makes the following statement. Okay, hold on. This that we learned. Nazir shenitma tumas harbe eina mevi ala karban echad. If a Nazir becomes tamei multiple times, he only brings one set of sacrifices. So now the problem is as follows. Why exactly? What does this mean? So if he becomes tamei, then becomes tahar completely, brings his karbanos and becomes tamei again, obviously he brings multiple sacrifices. Right? The guy was a Nazir for 30 days, let's say. He kept 2 days, becomes tamei, waits 7 days, cuts his head, cuts his hair, brings the carbon the 8th day, restarts his Naziris. By the 10th day, he's tamei again. Starts again, and he brings a new set of carbonates, obviously. So what does it mean that he only brings one carbon? It means that, let's say he becomes tamei before he brought his carbon. So he becomes tamei, counts the 7 days, becomes tahar, right? Cuts his hair. On the 8th day, he becomes tamei again. So now let's examine this. Ma'antana, Amar of Chizr. Chizr says, Rabbi Yehudah. This must be the opinion of Rabbi Yehudah. The Amar Nazirus tahara mishvi chayla. He says you become tahor on the 7th day. So actually, when he becomes tamei on the 8th day, I'm sorry, when he becomes tamei on the 7th day, or the night, it's really the night, the 8th day night, then he's a new nazir, but he still hasn't brought his korban. So then we say you're allowed to bring all of them at once, since you haven't brought your korban yet. The Amr Nazir is Tara Mishri Chala. The Nazir starts on the 7th day. It's possible where you become tummy on the 7th day multiple times. Since he has not met a time that he's able to bring a korban. In other words, if he became tummy on the 8th day, so he's already obligated to bring a korban. So you bring your korban now, and then afterwards become pure and bring another korban. But because, according to Rabbi Yossi, you're a nazir before you're obligated in a korban, you're only obligated to bring one set of korbanos. If you say it's the opinion of Rebbe that you become pure you restart the Naziris on the 8th day, if you become tummy on the 7th day, it's one long tumah because you haven't restarted the Naziris. You only push restart on the 8th day, right? If you become tummy, right? So if you become tummy on the 7th day, it's just an extension. You never restarted your Naziris. It's not multiple tumas. Okay. Let's say you restarted the Naziris on the 8th day, and then you became tummy before you brought the karbanos. This happened multiple times. You're already obligated to bring the korban because it's already the 8th day. So why should your current obligation exempt future obligations? As you're Nazir, you became tummy. So therefore, you should have to bring another set of karbanos. Just hang on a second. My time is Rebbe. What's the opinion of Rebbe? So the Gemara says, Amakra, the verse states, we'll read it together. V'chiper olav me'asharchata ala nefesh. The Kohen will bring the sacrifices. V'chiper olav will provide him with atonement. Right? Ala nefesh. And then what does it say afterwards? V'hadra v'kiddush is resh nizrei. He will begin counting again his naziris. Right? So it talks about atonement. And then, b'yayim hahu, which means on that day, the guy will start counting his naziris. So it seems perfectly logical that it should be on the 8th day. Rabbi Yehudah in Ken Lema Krav Kiddush es Roshai. Obviously, if the Torah says, bring a korban, get a kapara, start naziris, right? Then obviously, when do you start your naziris? After your korban, after your atonement. Okay, but then why does it have to say by Yemahu on that day? Obviously, it's on that day. Lema Krav Kiddush es Roshai. Top words of 18b. Bayemahu lamali. Why does it have to say Bayemahu on that day? To the contrary. The fact that Torah has to say on that day, it means on a different day. Because it wouldn't be necessary if it was actually dependent on that day, then obviously it's self-explanatory. There's no reason to tell me it should happen on that day. I know it happens on that day. Because it says he brings a korban, he gets an atonement, and he restarts his naziris. Now, if they're all in the same pasuk, the same verse, presumably they all happen at, roughly speaking, the same time. The fact that Torah has to say on that time, that indicates to you it's actually a different time we're referring to, and that's going to be the 7th day. If the 8th day would be self-explanatory. So then it's not necessary to say B'yemahu on that day. So now you in Yom Shvi, it's referring to the 7th day. Okay, so the Gemara says it's a good question. What about Rebbe? Rebbe says B'yemahu on that day. Well, why does it have to say B'yemahu? It's sort of obvious it's B'yemahu. So the Gemara says Rebbe says B'yemahu come to tell me something else. Rebbe Nami except B'yemahu. It says B'yemahu. This is the reason why it says B'yemahu. To tell you, you become tummy on that day, but not in this order. In other words, the verse states he brings the carbon, he gets an atonement, starts his Naziris. On that day. Says Rebbe, it happens on that day, but not in that order. In other words, even if you did not bring your carbonis yet, you're still a Nazir. Together? So in other words, the guy at that morning, the guy is a Nazir, even before he brings his carbonis. Okay. So Gemara says Rav Chizda tried to say the brisa of the brisa that says the difference between a Nazir that became Tameh and a Tameh that became a Nazir is regarding the 7th and 8th day. A Nazir becoming Tameh starts on the 8th day. One second. Oh no, I'm sorry. Gemara's going back to the other brisa. I'm sorry. The other brisa. Give me a moment. The other brisa is as follows, where the guy, we were talking about multiple Naziris, and we say he brings only one carbon for multiple tumas of Naziris. As part of a single Naziris, he became Tameh multiple times, he only brings one carbon. So the Gemara says as follows. The Gemara says that must be the opinion of Rabbi Yossi. It says you could become Tahar and become a Nazir before you bring a carbon. So therefore, if you become Tameh the day that you become a Nazir, you become Tameh, the day you restart your Naziris to become Tameh, so then you only bring one carbon because you're not yet obligated to bring a carbon until the 8th day, and at that point you're already Tameh. So again, so you have multiple times the guy becomes Tameh in a single Naziris. He only brings one carbon. Why is that? Because he was only ever obligated to bring one carbon. How did that happen? Because he became Tameh multiple times on his 7th day. So he restarted his Naziris, but he was never obligated to bring a carbon because that only happens on the 8th day. Okay, so we're saying that must be the opinion of Rabbi Yossi, obviously, because we're saying that you have to become Tameh on the 7th day. The Gemara says, "Look, going to Chazia Belel Shmini." The Rebbe, okay, so it's an interesting idea here called Mechusar Zman. Mechusar Zman. What does that mean? Laila Mechusar Zman. Okay, so. Well, you can't shake a lulav by night, right? Now, does that mean, is that a technical problem? In other words, the lulav is taken on the 15th day, which really, in truth of the matter, begins at night. So the truth is that a lulav could be taken a whole day. Technically speaking, a lulav can actually be taken until the daytime. What would be the difference? The difference would be, let's say there's give you one specific example. You have a hados, right? The myrtle. It's part of the lulav. If the myrtle has started to grow, if anyone's bought myrtles from a shop, they often have berries growing from them. A mature myrtle grows berries. Okay. These little things that stick out of it. If a myrtle has too many berries, it's non-kosher. This, however, is a kosher problem that you can resolve, right? Let's say somebody knocks the pitum off your esrog. Not so easy to put it back together again, right?
They didn't have super glue.
Yeah. In certain instances, it might actually be acceptable to glue an esrog, but first day, let's say it's not going to be acceptable. Okay. So again, a guy has an esrog that loses the pitum. It's not a rectifiable invalidation. However, the berries you can rectify, cut them off, right? However, once the time where you're able to shake a little of an esrog came, and you didn't take off the berries, not you necessarily, or the berry or somebody else, the berries are still on. So this is considered an invalid myrtle, and you're not allowed to shake a little of an esrog. And the question is, when is that time? Is that time the 15th day of Tishrei, meaning even the nighttime? It's just technically speaking, you can take a little of at night, but the truth is it's part of the 15th day. Or is it in the morning? The question is, it's a general question, how to view nighttime for things that have an obligation that comes in morning. So for example, we have a Nazir. Nazir sacrifices can only be brought by daytime because sacrifices are only brought by day. Not only that, they have to be brought after the Tamid, first sacrifice. So it's not just daytime, it's significantly after daytime. So do we say that he becomes a Nazir on the 8th day, meaning the night of the 8th day? and the karbanos are only brought the 8th day in the morning, do we say that means that actually he's a nazir before he could bring the carbon? Or do we say no? As soon as the 8th day comes, he's obligated to bring a carbon. That means that at nighttime, he's already obligated to bring a carbon. Technically speaking, he can't bring it until the morning.
Yeah.
Is the fact that a carbon can be brought in the morning, can only be brought in the morning, is that a technical difficulty? Or is that sort of fundamental component? That means you're only obligated to bring the carbon in the morning. Together, when are you obligated to bring the carbon of a nazir? Is it on the 8th night or is it in the 8th morning? And the question here really is, of course it's the 8th night, but the question is, how do you view nighttime with regard to a carbon? Do you say that because it's nighttime, therefore fundamentally you're not obligated to bring a carbon yet? Or do you say no, it's just a technical problem and fundamentally you are obligated to bring a carbon? Together? So Gemara says,
I of course know the answer, but I can see that Jules is chomping at the bit to take the credit himself, so we'll defer to him.
okay. So Gemara says, let's go with Rebbe, and let's say he becomes tummy on the 8th night. And what? Because if in other words, if Rebbe holds Laila Mechusar Zman, that means that the obligation to bring a carbon only comes 8th day morning. You become a nazir 8th day night, right? The night before the 8th day. So if that's the case, then we have a simple resolution. It could be even Rebbe, and the guy becomes tummy on the 8th night, and he hasn't yet been obligated to bring a carbon. Why not? Because even though it's the 8th day, but the 8th night, but Laila Mechusar Zman, it's considered a significant disruption, and you're not obligated yet to bring a carbon. So Gemara says, Ema, it must be that Rebbe holds Laila is Mechusar Zman. Laila is not considered Mechusar Zman, meaning the obligation to bring a carbon comes on the 8th night and not on the 8th day. It says, it's a very good response. He says, look, what is the verse? The verse says, when are you obligated to become a nazir? When you're able to bring your carbon. So he says, Memonavshach, whichever way you go. If you'll say Laila is Mechusar Zman, meaning the obligation to bring a carbon only comes in the morning, then you're only a nazir in the morning. Because the verse equates the two. And if you'll say that Laila is Lav Mechusar Zman, meaning the obligation to bring a carbon is nighttime already, then you didn't help anything. Then it becomes a nazir at night, but he's also obligated to bring a carbon at night. So it's never possible, according to Rebbe, for somebody to be a nazir, to be a tamei who recovered, who's now a nazir, who isn't obligated to bring a carbon. They happen at the same time. Okay. If you say that Laila is considered a significant disruption, meaning the obligation to bring a carbon only comes in the morning, the carbon. When are you able to bring a carbon? L'tzafra, in the morning. If that's the case, Naziris nami lechayla atzafra. Naziris also is because it's in the same boat. You also can't bring that until the morning. If you say that nighttime is not mechusar zman, meaning that the obligation to bring a carbon is at nighttime, Naziris tahara chayla me'orta. The Naziris the Naziris also starts at the same time at nighttime, in which case you're obligated to bring a carbon. So there's never a situation where a recovering nazir tamei is a nazir, but isn't yet obligated to bring a carbon. Okay, so now let's just wrap this up briefly. There's so far we saw here a debate between. So far we saw three things today. We concluded the Gemara that a tamei that becomes a nazir does not cut his hair. We also had a debate between Rebbe and Rabbi Dovid Yehudah. Rebbe says a nazir becomes a nazir restarts in Naziris on the 8th day, following his tumah, and Rabbi Dovid Yehudah says it's the 7th day. Okay, now we get into a couple more opinions. Okay, next Gemara. Gufa they take out. Taisus pulls out the word Gufa. Okay, Nitma b'shvi. Somebody becomes tummy on the 7th day, and then becomes tummy on the 7th day again. He only brings one carbon. Nitma b'shmini, if he becomes tummy on the 8th day, The chazer v'nitman b'shmini, and then it becomes tummy again on the 8th day. Maybe carbon echad, I'll call echad ve'echad. He brings a carbon for each Naziris, and that's because in the 8th day he's already obligated to bring a carbon. Yeah, 1 second. Umayne miyad, and he begins counting immediately. Divrei Rabbi Eliezer. This is the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. Okay, Rabbi Eliezer says that the 8th day, this is similar to the opinion of Rabbi, that on the 8th day you become obligated to bring a carbon, and your Nazir restarts. But they don't happen they happen simultaneously. So the 8th day you become a Nazir and you have to bring a carbon, but you become a Nazir even before you brought the carbon. The Chachamim carbon echad al hakol. In that case, on the 8th day, you'd still bring only one sacrifice. When would you bring multiple sacrifices? Achiyave chatosim. Hevi chatosim b'nitma, behevi chatosim b'nitma, maybe carbon al kol echad ve'echad. Okay. Just heavy chatosim, heavy hashamay mina. Okay, as follows. So the first opinion is the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. This is very similar to Rabbi. Rabbi Eliezer says 8th day you become an Nazir and you're obligated to bring carbon, but not necessarily at the same time. 1 second. 1 second. Sorry, take that back. No, sorry, it's the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. There it is. You restart the Naziris on the 7th day, according to Rabbi Eliezer, and you don't have to bring a carbon until the 8th day. So therefore, if you become tummy on the 7th day, you bring one set of carbonates every time you become tummy. According to the Rabbanon, not only do you restart the Naziris on the 8th day, but you only restart the Naziris after you brought your carbon chatos. So if you brought a carbon chatos, and you become tummy immediately, then you have to bring another carbon chatos next time. You have to bring a new set of carbonates for the next tumah. If, however, you did not bring the carbon chatos yet, you didn't bring any carbonates for that matter, then you do not. Then you need to bring then you bring one set of carbonates for all the different times he became tummy. So again, it becomes tummy on the 8th day, becomes pure again, becomes tummy again on the 8th day. Third time, same story, right? 3 times in 24 days. He brings one set of carbonates, unless he becomes tummy after he's already brought the carbon chatos. 1 second. Okay. However, if he brought the chatas, but he brings 3 carbonates, the chatas, an asham, and an ayla. If he brings the chatas but did not bring the asham, you still bring a new set of carbonates for each tumah. Rabbi Shmuel ben Rabbi Yechon ben Breka Aimer. Rabbi Shmuel, the son of Rabbi Yechon ben Breka, says, "Kishem shechatasa ikvasai kein ashamay ma'akvay." Just like you need to bring a carbon chatos, you also need to bring a carbon asham. Asham is another type of sin offering. A nazir becoming tahor brings 3: a chatas, an asham, and a ayla.
It's just Hasham's another sin.
Yeah. So you have to wait until both offerings are brought before you restart the Naziris. If he became tummy before he brought both, he'll bring 1 carbon for both times he became tummy. Okay. Bishlem el Rabbi Eliezer, according to Rabbi Eliezer, Amar Krav Kiddush is Reish B'Yemahu, Av Bishlei Hevi Carbon Isav. Rabbi Eliezer says that you restart the Naziris on the 7th day. However, and therefore, even before you bring the carbonis, before you bring the carbonis, you restart the Naziris, and therefore, if you become tummy on the 7th day, you bring only 1 set of carbonis, and on the 8th day, it's multiple sets of carbonis because you're already obligated to bring a carbon. Okay, v'rabbanon. And that's what he uses for the word bayemahu. So bayemahu tells me even though he didn't bring the carbonis yet, he'll have to bring another set of carbonis. In other words, the fact that he's obligated to bring the carbonis requires him to bring a new set of carbonis next time he becomes tummy.
You already
he didn't bring, so he became a Nazir on the 7th day. He becomes Tamei on the 8th day. He brings a new set of karbanos because he's already obligated to bring his karban. That's the verse of Bayemahu tells me. Rabbanon, Hahu Afapi Shaloi Hevi Ashamai. Bayemahu tells me on that day, even though he didn't finish bringing his karbanos. El Rabbi Shmuel, according to Rabbi Shmuel, Hahu Lamali. Why does it say Bayemahu? Amalacha Hahu Afapi Shaloi Hevi Ilosai. Even though he didn't bring his karban oila. In other words, Rabbi Shmuel's, the 3 karbanos he brings, the chatas and oila and asham. So according to the Rabbanon, the chatas is the main one. Before the chatas, you're not a full-fledged nazir. And if you become tamei, you bring 1 set of karbanos for everything. Once you brought chatas, then you bring a new set of karbanos for each tumah. According to Rabbi Shmuel, it's the chatas and the asham that you need to bring. You bring both of them, new karban for each tumah. Don't bring both. Even if you brought either one, then you will bring only 1 karban for the next tumah as well. 1 set of karbanos. So, even according to Rabbi Shmuel, the oila is not necessary. 1 second. Okay. Now, according to the Rabbanon, not only is the asham not necessary, but the oila also is not necessary. How do they know the oila is not necessary? Rabbanon oila loy boy miyuta. We don't need a verse to tell me that the oila doesn't require an exception. Durin ba'almahu, a karban oila is a gift. So why would I think the gift would be a critical component of the tahara process of making the nazir pure? Obviously, it's not necessary, and therefore the verse come to tell me that even the asham is not necessary. Asham is usually mandated. Even the asham is not necessary. Okay, 1 second. Okay, my tamayu drabanan. What's the reason of the rabbis? The Tanya we learned the Hizr Lashem Esimein is right. The Hevi Keves Ben Shnasei LaOsham. He becomes a Nazir to Hashem, and he brings a sheep for an Asham. Ma Talmud Leimer. What's the verse coming to tell me? Since we find that Asham in the Torah is typically a critical karban, it's a karban that you're obligated to bring. So Talmud Leimer, therefore, the verse states the Hizr V'Hevi. First he becomes a Nazir, then he brings the karban asham. Tell me that Apapisha loy hevi hizr, even before he brings the karban, he is still a Nazir. He's a Nazir first, then he brings the karban. Tell me that asham is a non-critical karban in the context of a Nazir tamei needing to bring multiple karbanos for becoming tamei on the 8th day. Rabbi Shmuel ben Rabbi Yochanan ben Aimer, the Hizr Behavi, Amos Hizr Bisman Shehavi. The Hizr Behavi tells me that, to the contrary, it's got to be at the same time. So, in other words, you become a Nazir when you bring the karban asham. You need to bring both the asham and the chatas. Together? Okay, perfect. We'll stop here. Any questions?